Hi, welcome everyone to today's Tuesday Times Roundtable. I'm Eric from the Global Learning Office, and I'm going to introduce today's moderator, who is a very good friend of the Global Learning Office and who runs an office that is very integral to FIU's global learning mission, the Office of Study Abroad. Laura Boudon. Prior to running the Study Abroad office as director here at FIU, Laura worked for FIU's Wertheim College of Medicine for more than 4 years, and she also was working towards global ends in that capacity as well at the College of Medicine. She was the associate director for international programs. She's also worked for several years as an adjunct faculty member in the School of Social Work. She has more than 10 years of professional experience in higher education administration. She's worked in addition to FIU at Georgetown University, American University, and the University of South Carolina before joining our family in 2009. She has graduate degrees in international relations and social work and has a FIU PhD in international relations with a dissertation that focused on the international political economy of coffee and its impact on coffee producers and involved research in both Colombia and the Ivory Coast. I'll leave it on that note because it's making me crave coffee very badly. And I will turn it over to today's moderator, the fantastic Dr. Laura Boudon.
Thanks. Hi, everyone. So you have in front of you the article that I selected for today's Tuesday Times Roundtable. And my purpose really today is for us to have a conversation about the children on the border. As I think we will see, it's a complex issue involving numerous parties, and I think it's definitely worthy of our attention and time, especially since we focus so much on international issues. And I know also that global learning is meant to be local, and local doesn't necessarily have to be in Miami. Local can be, in Dallas, Texas, or the communities along the border, along the U.S.-Mexican border. So, I know that sometimes you guys haven't read the article when you come to the Tuesday Times Roundtable, so feel free to draw both on the article and also your own experiences and what you have heard. I know that during the summer there was a lot of conversation about this topic. So I think what I'd like to start out with is what are the facts about the children along the border? So if you had to describe what's happening, let's start out with what the facts are. Who would like to?
Kids in Central America are coming to the United States because of instability and violence in their countries. And that's the only way to survive. Because most of those kids, they probably don't have parents, they're probably dead, so they have no other option besides to join them. Or be against them, they're against them and die. So that's what it's free.
Okay. So you included a lot of things, right? But so Central American children, and they are mostly Central American children, are coming across the border. So let's talk about the countries that the children are coming from, and also, and I don't remember if the article discussed this specifically or not, but are Mexican children part of the issue here? So the laws are a little, go ahead. Mm-hmm. So the children coming across the border are coming from Mexico, Guatemala, Honduras, and El Salvador. Those are the wave of children that have come across the border this year have come from those 4 countries. Fact, when you hear about the numbers coming across the border, Mexican children are included in that number. However, when they're stopped at the border, they are able to be returned to Mexico because they're at the border. So when we talk about children on the border and we talk about the situation that is happening for the states along the border, Mexican children are not ending up being part of the conversation so much because they are being returned to their country, more as a Mexican issue as opposed to the issue that we're facing. But so the other children have made their way through Mexico to, the southwestern United States. Texas, in particular, has been significantly impacted. What are the numbers? Have you guys seen numbers? Do you know the numbers? How many are we talking about? Okay, so I heard 40, 50. Okay, so in the first 9 months of 2014, 60,000 children came across the border. And this is, for the most part, unaccompanied children. So that just gives you an idea. I mean, FIU is not even 60,000 students, right? We're at about 54, 55,000. So that's just to give you an idea of the number of children that we're speaking about, and why I personally thought that having a Tuesday Times Roundtable on this issue was important. One of the interesting facts that I learned in doing my research in preparing for our conversation, and I'm not sure what to make of it, maybe you have an opinion and would like to share it with us, 3/4 of the children coming across are boys. You guys have any thoughts on that?
Probably it's less dangerous for a boy, especially sexual abuse.
Okay.
Girls don't be controlled by social grade.
I feel that maybe it's because a lot of girls are sold, like you said, into the sex trade instead of, so rather than being documented as trying to cross the border, they've been put. It's a completely different scenario that they're being put through. Rather than being caught on the border, they're hid away in rooms or something. We just don't know those numbers.
So maybe the girls are making their way in some way as well, but they're not making it to the US border. Is that what you're saying? Okay.
Either just being shipped somewhere else.
Okay.
Parents know that their boys won't be married out of poverty, but their daughters might. Yeah.
So a different.
They don't send them over.
Okay.
They have other options or other chances.
Okay. And one of the things I would like for you to think about, how many of you in the room are parents? Any of you parents? Can you imagine a situation where you would send one or more of your children on a journey from your country through a foreign country to the United States? Can you envision that? I invite you to think for a moment about the parents and their perspective. What would lead parents to make that kind of decision?
Yeah, I think it's the problems that they come from as far as for not having resources like education as we do here. My grandmother, who's from Haiti, she came here when she was 17, and that's because her parents chose to let her go to be able to create a life. Like without her, like it was the fact of the resources that they have back home are not as great as they are here. It's an opportunity for them to hopefully be able to gain those resources to be able to do better for themselves than they would be able to do back home.
Mm-hmm. Okay, other perspectives.
I know that a lot of parents were able to make their way over here and leave their kids. They usually leave their kids in the care of the country, and then they pay to have people help them go through the journey to come here. And then, I mean, there's different situations. Then other parents haven't seen their kids for 20 years, and then they call them, or they don't really, as far as I know from the situations that I know, because my mom works with the kids that have come over here, the kids rarely come first on their own, like unless there's another option.
So I think you're making a good point, which is I do think in some situations this year, children have been sent first. But there are a number of children who are trying to catch up to relatives or parents who are somewhere in the United States. And I think that's one of the stories that the article describes is one such child, who came across the border. And to be concrete, most of these children who are coming across the border, they have been told to walk up to a border control agent and tell them, their name and give them their birth certificate, proving their identity and who they are and what country they come from. So those are kind of the instructions that they've been given, which is not much instruction if you think about it.
But Mike, I have a question actually. For those children that are sent before their parents, what kind of care are they being sent into? I mean, I can't imagine seeing a child being sent into a country where I know nothing. Maybe I speak a little bit of the language, and I don't know anything. So, like you're saying, they're instructed to walk up to this border patrol and tell them who they are, and that's it. What kind of situation are these kids being put in? I worry about that.
I do too.
Actually, the comment I've heard, most of them have family here, and they're trying to get in contact with them. But the majority of the time, they're not able to. And I know they're sending kids back already. And also, I can talk in respect of Honduras, because mom is from there, and they escaped because of the violence. Everything is run by me.
Can you say a little bit more about that?
Like, I have family over there that they tell me that one, it's very dangerous to go to Honduras right now because a lot of people are getting kidnapped and they're asking for money first. And that's all I can say right now.
Okay, that's fine.
Well, I'm from Nicaragua, so I know the violence here is not nothing compared to the rest of the country. A lot of that has to do with drugs coming from Colombia. It's not made in Mexico. The Mexicans buy it from Colombia, so they distribute it through Central America. They do not stop in it. They do stop in Nicaragua, but a lot of violence takes on starting at Honduras and then going on to Guatemala, Salvador. So yeah, so I think the basis of all this is drugs and who like the cartels who run the drug company,
Okay. I would agree. In what I was reading, it seems that for Guatemalan children who are coming across the border, the main reason for them coming across the border is the poverty that they face in Guatemala. And for both Honduras and El Salvador, the issue really is focusing around, you're saying drugs, and I think that's a central element to it, but the kind of result of the drugs is the violence that's coming with the gangs, right? So the drugs themselves are not necessarily creating that, but the culture that is surrounding the drugs and the gangs that are part of it are creating that environment.
For example, we know that the drugs are going to the U.S. and we know that, so it's like they're manufactured or a lot of the raw materials are grown in South America and then they move north. But anything that moves north. Like for example, you studied coffee, and that's certainly a resource that is grown in South America and gets shipped north as well. But there's no violence that surrounds the coffee trade. So this is an obvious result of this like global war on drugs that the U.S. has kind of strong-armed Central and South America into waging.
I would agree that that's definitely part of it, and I appreciate your bringing coffee into it. One of the things that I think has happened with many crops in Central and South America is that for producers, thinking of it from the producer's perspective right now, for producers it's a lot more lucrative to grow drugs and get the money paid for the drugs versus, think about how much you pay for your cup of coffee and how much of that is going to the producer. The 1%, maybe not even 1%, that the producer is actually getting, whereas for the drugs, they're getting a lot more money for it. So I agree with you that the war on drugs is definitely part of the issue, but we have to look at it kind of globally, both in terms of U.S. policies, but then also not just U.S. policies on drugs, but U.S. policies on other areas that impact.
Are you suggesting that it would be a bad decision to make drugs? And it's multifaceted, but are you saying it would be a bad decision to make drugs legal because then farmers would have to go spend more time?
No, I'm not commenting in any way on the legality of drugs. When I'm speaking from the producer's perspective. When you're a coffee producer or you're an agricultural producer and you have a choice of what it is that you're going to grow, and you're thinking of your own interest, think about the decisions that we all make about the choices in our lives. You have a choice between growing something that is going to give you a significant amount of income versus producing coffee, which the world enjoys coffee and the world loves coffee, but we don't pay that much for our coffee, and the producer doesn't get that much for his coffee.
Like mandating higher coffee prices in order to incentivize people away from growing the types of raw materials necessary for drug production.
So I wouldn't use the word mandate, but I would be in favor of higher prices for agricultural crops so that families can live off of what they're producing and will be less tempted to grow, the drugs.
Yes, well, I'm from Honduras, and I know that in the recent 3 years, we have had a spike in violence. We currently have the highest murder rate in the world. And that's due to many factors, one of which I think is the main factor is because U.S. anti-drug policies were concentrated on Colombia and Mexico, and they drove the transit routes for drug cartels into Central America. Because Central America, production of drugs is really, it's not as high as it would be, say, for example, in South America, given Bolivia, right? But the transit of drugs is what really is fueling gangs, is fueling all this violence. There's also political unrest. We had a coup d'etat in 2009, and that has created a lot of political instability as well.
I think we're focusing on drugs as the main factor of the problems these different countries are facing. But the real issue relies upon the fact that political infrastructure in those countries are lacking the actual authority over, you can call it producers, you can call it consumers, and you can call it the whole infrastructure of the country in general, which is leading to the fact of violence and drug production. And going along the train of thought that Dr. Boudon said about the choices that we have of either growing coffee or growing drugs, same as us students growing opportunities as being students, or growing our opportunities as being drug dealers in the street. Same analogy there. It's it's easier for you to go as a drug dealer and make money, and that's why a lot of people do that. And it's especially in those countries where the opportunities are not given to these people. And when you see it in social deviancy, you see it in criminology, when you don't have the opportunities that society and your government has to give you as your father, your mother, your responsible actor, since they're the responsible actor of the citizens, people go and take those chances of being drug producers because they know that they're going to be paying more than growing coffee. So the whole problem of this country rely on the lack of education, the lack of healthcare, the lack of opportunities in itself, which are creating those type of problems in which drugs, of course, is one of the main factors. But it's definitely not the root. And in order for us to address this type of problem, we have to go to the root of the problem. Because that's only a stem. Drugs is only a stem. There's a root, and then there are human trafficking, one of those stems, drugs, another stem, which is a big stem, of course, but it's definitely not the big problem in this country. I would say that it's the lack of food, the lack of education, the lack of healthcare.
And I think that brings us back to why the children are leaving. Parents are trying to push parents are realizing that this is not the world they want their child to grow up in. They're having them move away, or they're sending them away to somebody that they know in the States because of the violence and of the society that they're growing up with. And so rather than having their child become a victim to this, whether it's dying at a young age or making the decision that I don't want to live in poverty. So what's the best way for me not to live in poverty? Do instead of growing whatever it is, tobacco leaves or coffee or anything, they're going into the drug. Why? Because it produces the most amount of money. And that's just something globally that we all live by. Everybody, for a general consensus, makes a decision on what they want to do based on not only what they love, but how much money am I going to make? Am I going to be able, I want, my future, I want the big diamond ring and the multi-million-dollar home. So what do I have to do to achieve that? Some people, there is no option of education, so they do the drug or the sex trafficking or whatever it may be. Choosing to be a teacher, that's an exception. And you get asked by several, professors and people throughout your educational career, oh, is this really what you want to do? You realize there's no money in teaching. So there's this foundation that we're all being raised on that money is the most important thing. And money being the most important thing, you do what you got to do. And these children, their parents are realizing that it isn't, that they want to send their kids into something better.
I wanted to comment on what she said about the whole money being a certain thing. Some parents, especially for the countries where their kids are in poverty, will sell their kids, thinking that, okay, I don't have enough money to afford to send them there, or I really don't want to risk sending them there by themselves. So I'm going to sell them to a family or to someone or to this or to that, getting the money so that way I can get myself out of this so that I can then be with them. But then that also creates the problem of the friction because whomever that they're supposed to meet at the border probably isn't there, takes the money and goes, or actually takes the kids and then sells those kids off for money. So money is also a bigger factor, whether it be through drugs or trafficking or whatever the case is. They want to get them out by any means necessary, as she said.
Yeah, well, I would argue that for the majority of the cases, parents are sending or they're commissioning a smuggler to bring the kids into the United States. I'm not sure what the statistics are on parents actually selling their kids. I think that's the majority of the cases. And going back to the root cause of the problem, well, I believe that in my country at least, which I know, being from there, the part of the inequality, the lack of opportunity, the lack of education is actually fueled by uh, in an indirect way by drug cartels as well, because politicians are in debt with money laundering, with protecting these entrenched groups, and it's very difficult for a democratic uprising to stand against that very powerful force. The GDP of one of Central American countries is not enough to overpower the money that is made from drug trafficking in Central America. So democratic options, democratic alternatives are very difficult to make happen.
So what do you think would be the solution?
Well, I believe that there has to be a control of drug cartels in Central America, especially politicians that are working with drug cartels, because there is no way for the vote of one person to compete against politicians who are being financed by this fountain of money. I believe that we do, especially in Honduras, because of the coup d'etat, there is a strong political movement to bring more equality, to bring opportunities, to bring education, but it is very difficult for that movement to really take a hold if it has no way to stand up against the entrenched political elite that has been there and is taking much of its power from these cartels or from the money laundering.
I'm not so sure about the parents actually selling their children. I believe if you think more long term, I believe that if one of the kids actually do get through, the two things that they'll be able to do is to work up here for money and send money back home, as well as they will be able to file for their parents and the extended family in the years to come. So I'm thinking they think that I'm not sure the actual ratio of children that's caught to the ones that actually get through. That's something that's very difficult to actually identify. And it's possible that a lot of them are getting through, which means that it's to the parents' eyes, it's advantageous to them to try.
And maybe part of it is on the part of the parents, a lack of understanding of how things are going to go when the children get here, right? Both for the children who are walking up to a border patrol officer and, saying, I am so and so, and here's my birth certificate, thinking that the road, ends with that. And then, the reality is many of these children are being, if they don't have relatives in the U.S. and they don't have like a local foster family that they can live with, then these children are being detained, right? So I'm sure that's not what the parents envisioned, for their child. But the other aspect, which is what you're describing, that maybe there are other children who are not walking up to the border patrol officer, or maybe they never ran into one, and they kind of just make their way into society, right? Is kind of what I'm hearing you say. And so, I have a couple of thoughts about that. One is that if that is the case, which it's very much possibly the case, and we don't know what the numbers are, then the influx of children across the border may be bigger than what our numbers are currently showing, right? And I did want to give you some perspective that, because there always have been children coming across the border, but the numbers for the first 9 months of 2014 are 99% higher than they were in 2013. That's a significant increase. And if we come back to the U.S. side for now, I'm not sure how much you know about immigration law and what the laws are for these children, but these children by law become the responsibility of the Office of Refugee Resettlement, which is part of the Department of Health and Human Services. Their average caseload in a year is 7,000 or 8,000. And this year, their caseload is 60,000. And the caseload, in part, is children and cases who at some point need to go in front of a judge for a judge to decide, does this child have good reason to stay? And if not, then the child would not stay. So that's just the cases that have come up this year. In total, all immigration cases combined, which include all other adults in the mix, I just was looking on a website today that keeps track of immigration cases. There are 400,000 immigration cases pending today for the entire country. So the additional 60,000, that's a significant impact on our legal system and on other systems, across our country.
Yes, it seems to me that this political instability in Central American countries and violence stems precisely from they don't have a firm economic foundation. So I feel that the most viable solution for these countries to resolve their problems would be to introduce some sort of economic solution that they can further improve their school systems and their political process and all of that. And they don't have, I feel like they don't have a certain enterprise, a lucrative enterprise that would give them this possibility.
I have a few hands up here. Well, I think part of that is because there is a huge, there is an economic monopoly. Well, that happens in most Latin American countries actually, but I think it's in Central America, and that it's very difficult to compete. For example, if you have a small business, if there is a monopoly in place. And regarding the legal treatment of immigrants, I think that's quite an important issue here because since this has become so widespread in the media, it seems to me that the immediate political solution has been to propose to make the process faster to get these kids back home. But I think that is obviously the most effective solution, but it's terrible. It would be terrible because many of these kids are actually they're very. I'm not sure what the specific legal status for refugee is. But if refugee is a person whose life is at risk if they come back to their country, then many of these kids are refugees. And if they're just sent back to their countries through the expedited legal process, then that would be endangering the lives of many, many minors.
The murder rate and the violence rate is higher in Central and South America in the Caribbean. So we know right from the bat that sending anyone back would increase their rate of death. So I don't know if that's the definition of refugee. It's just everyone who's sent across the border.
Did you have another point that you wanted to make?
I have a lot of
points. So go ahead, because I've seen your hand up a couple times.
Okay. I guess one of the things you were just talking about the 400,000 and then the 60,000 for this year, but luckily you chatted about last year and the 99% increase that it had been. I think it's important to look at trends of this instead of just looking at snapshot data. For example, the 400,000, that's like, we don't have very much context. We don't know what it's been like the last 10 years or so. But it is, I was thinking about this earlier, we know that children have been coming across the border. It's not a new phenomenon. What is the cause of the spike? I mean, we haven't seen a 99% increase in violence. We haven't seen a 99% increase in the drug trafficking. those are relatively constant. But why has I guess the deportation of the children by the parents gone up so much?
You had your hand. Yes. I just wanted to comment on what you were saying from the U.S. system perspective and then her refugee perspective, because I'm also an immigrant, and then so I have a very familiar kind of perspective on the legal, the immigrant and illegal, and I've also been close with a lot of people that have had the whole process of living here for 20 years, maybe having their entire education here and going through that harsh illegal to legal process that can take up to 10 years. And then I also have the perspective of, because my mom works for the Catholic Charities, like she's a therapist for the children that are crossing, and she tells me a lot about the process. Not all of them get to stay, but a lot of them do get to stay, and there's a lot of revenue invested in them. And for the U.S., I mean, everybody wants to migrate here, not only them. So we have the 60,000, and we have all the other people also. And I feel like there should be some sort of solution. Like, the U.S. obviously gets involved with the countries that it has some sort of advantage getting involved with. And I always question how come they don't really get involved in the Central American countries to kind of, I know that it would be like, a monetary investment and a whole other situation that they might not want to be getting involved with, but they're putting all this money and effort, and they know that they're flying the kids, and then they're paying for the shelters for the kids, they're paying for the medical aspect of the kids, and would it be like a better solution in effort-wise and monetary-wise for them to try to just help the countries per se, like political, or the monopoly, the economy, or whatever is needed for them to be more stable and not migrate, or is it better for them to spend all of this effort and money for them to have them here? Because eventually a lot of them will stay here, and they have that humanistic perspective of taking them in as well. So that's what I want to kind of know more about.
So I think what I'm hearing you, Juan, I'll let you speak, and then.
Well, if you ask me what the solution is as students, it's to volunteer. There's tons, hundreds, thousands of nonprofit organizations that work very hard here in Miami, which is the Latin American capital of the world, and I can name a few that you could go sign up and volunteer, which you know that your effort on a Saturday night or a Friday night, instead of you going out clubbing, would definitely go into gathering some money for this families in third world countries. I think you've heard about Techo. That's one of the best ones over here, which fundraises money for houses, and we actually go there and build the houses for different countries under us, Colombia, Argentina, Chile, etc. If we talk about why has there been this increase in immigration but not an increase in, for example, murder rate, definitely I could agree that it's linked to globalization, multinational corporations, technology, which has taken the jobs of lots of people, therefore decreasing the opportunities of most of these people to go there, and the job and the different type of minefields that are in these countries, where their only option is to migrate to bigger markets such as the United States. And regarding your point and your point, these countries, they have the natural resources and they have the capabilities as any other country to strive. But if we look at the root again of the downfall of these countries. It's the monetary policies and the economy and the economic policies that they had to go through in the past, through IMF, through World Bank, these loans that they took eventually to increase their infrastructure. But what was intended to increase their economy is now drawing back because they have lots of taxes, lots of debt. And the thing is that they can't pay those loans back that they took eventually for infrastructure because the debt is killing them. And they can't balance their payments. And financial institutions are not letting them.
So what I hear you guys going towards, which I think is good, is, in what direction should we go for solutions, right? So I'm hearing you say, maybe we should invest the money in those countries, help with their infrastructure, their educational system, help small businesses there, kind of get off the ground,
The West has already done that through the IMF and through the World Bank. So that's a solution that's been tried already.
Indirectly.
Well, I mean, I guess what I would like for you to think about in terms of solutions, right? So the children are here, the 60,000. So we have to work with those children, find the best possible outcome for those children. Because remember, they are children. Whether their parents are in the United States or not, these are children, and we have to think about their welfare, their well-being, and their future also. So I invite you to think about what makes sense to help the children who are here. And then, as you know, I know the U.S. government is big, but really in this country, especially having been through the recession that we've been through, our resources are not as unlimited as maybe they were in the past. So where do we choose to focus? Because we've been talking about a lot of different things. So we've talked about drug trade. We've talked about drugs. We've talked about the economic situations of these countries. From the U.S. only perspective, and we haven't really talked too much about this, what are our immigration policies? Are our immigration policies making the situation worse or better? Should we be changing our immigration policies? And there are some who would argue that the reason the children are coming across the border is because the border is not sealed 100%. I'm sure you've heard of those who would like to build a wall to make sure that folks can't come across. So, as there are many different perspectives on this issue, but what I invite you to think about, where should the U.S. government put its resources, and where would you put resources in terms of trying to come up with solutions, to this problem? And both there are short-term issues linked to the situation, and then there's medium and long-term situations as well.
I think it shouldn't be just a United States problem. We have a country above us. We got Canada. We could ask them for help. Because what does Canada do?
Well, I think this is a special issue because it's not only immigration, it's really a humanitarian crisis. Because for example, say Nicaragua, right? Nicaragua has had historically a lower GDP actually than most of Honduras, El Salvador, Guatemala, and most immigrants are actually coming from states in El Salvador, because the violence, the terrible spike in violence, has been happening in those countries, and thankfully it's not in Nicaragua. So I think that, I mean, the root of the problem is economic opportunity. Right? That is why gangs have taken a hold in Honduras and El Salvador. That is why drug money has made them more powerful and yes. But right now the immediate issue is the risk that these kids are taking on their lives by remaining right in their countries. So if you look at how, for example, Jordan is a country that takes in thousands of refugees, especially right now with the Syrian conflict, and that is an issue where the United States is very much involved. And when I look at that and I see how Jordan is taking thousands of refugees in, and how this is happening right now in the immediate border of the United States, and there's so much controversy over that, well, I see a little bit of a double-faced treatment of the issue. And I think it's also a good opportunity for the United States to examine its historical relation with Central America through the involvement of the IMF, through the involvement of the World Bank, and through various support for dictatorships in the past, sadly. Sorry?
Go ahead.
Yeah. I'm being a Honduran, I believe in our own political democratic movements, but I also believe that it's impossible for them to take a hold if we're being suffocated by this influx of money from drug cartels and from this entrenched economic elite that's been hampering democratic movement for so long.
But then there's also, just something that's going through my mind is how much does the United States help? Because I may not be completely well versed in everything, in all the political things that are going on, but I know that there's the question of, the United States is too involved, or the United States is not enough involved. And then immigrants, when do we stop, the argument, when do we stop, where does that law of who can come in and who cannot come in? And like you were saying, taking in all the refugees, then the question becomes, well, who's going to take care of them? Where is their housing? Where is their food going to come from? Is that all on, let's say, the American taxpayers? Are we supposed to pay for all their necessities? I'm just arguing the fact, I'm not saying, kick all these people out, don't help anyone. But that's also another issue that becomes apparent is, us as people who work every day or, do our part to help our families continue striving. And I know we have our own struggles and, there is poverty in the United States and we struggle and there are people who, don't have enough money to put food on the table that night. Are we supposed to be paying more taxes so we can take in more refugees and help these people and help them succeed in the United States? Or do we close off our doors and just say, goodbye, too bad, so sad? There's just so many arguments or so many directions this could go in.
I think the implication of an open policy with refugees has, they're deep in the way that if we just allow these people to freely come in, it would, we're pretty much implying that we could take in refugees from all over the world. We could take in refugees from Ebola-ridden Africa, from Syria, from all those countries that, because they are in danger. All those countries are danger-ridden places, and all those people are in danger. So under that same logic, we're going to be taking millions of refugees in, and going with what she said, it's going to play a burden on our already weakened structure of economy and our social structure.
And I want to add another twist to that, which is, we are a federal state, so you have the federal government. But if you listen to what is taking place along the southwest border, where the strongest voices are, whatever direction those voices are going in, they're from Texas, they're from the states that are being impacted. And, you know, the reality is, yes, we probably would all end up paying in some way, but those states more than the rest of us. And exactly.
You know, so
exactly.
What are you saying that those states are saying? What are you saying that those states are saying? I wasn't.
Just the federal structure that we have in the United States, you know, states that are in the middle of the country that are not facing this type of situation or this influx of refugees, they're not facing that same burden. So, you know, Texas, you really are hearing the governor of Texas, whether you agree with him or not. I feel like he should have a voice in this situation because his state is being impacted almost more than any other with this issue.
I was trying to deny the governor of Texas a voice. Is anyone trying to deny the governor?
No, I'm just adding to the complexity of the situation where you don't only have a federal government, but you have state governments that are trying to deal with the reality on the ground. That's all I'm trying to say.
Like just certain the states that are impacted more are the ones who are asking for more federal funds, and more federal funds come from the rest of the states. That's it.
I think one issue that a lot of people don't look at that is America is a land of immigrants, and that I'm sure if you trace everyone's ancestry from here, it have some immigrant that came in. Now, I'm not saying that the borders need to be open, but there are loopholes that they could close. Just like before, they had a time when a lot of people were coming and having children here, and the children were fighting for the parents. They have now closed those loopholes. Now, in the short term, the children are already here. I believe that they should naturalize them and close the loophole now that any kid that comes up with after this fact now will not be nationalized, and they would be immediately sent back to the country. So that deters people from doing it again. But initially, something needs to be done with children. And that's what people not understanding and realizing.
I have a question for that. Like, why is it okay to send the next child back, but not okay to send this child back?
Okay, well, let me ask you a question. Why is it okay to send someone from Haiti back and not someone from Cuba?
No, I'm not. I have no dog in the current state of the immigration policy. It's more like, because you're saying, let's take these 60,000 and not anyone and no one else afterwards. But why these 60,000 and not the 61st? And not 60,001 first?
But what I'm saying that there was no law really to know how to say it. There's a loophole in the immigration law there, somehow or the other. Just as how there was a loophole when someone comes here, they have a baby here. The baby is born here, so they are citizens.
Right.
But the baby is now filing for their parents, but it's a child. That's a loophole in the immigration system that they closed. Right? But the people who, before they got through. So what I'm saying now is a social issue. The children are already here. But there's still a loophole in the immigration system where that these children have come up to the border with their birth paper. They are not being sent back. So what I'm trying to say is close all the avenues / loopholes in the immigration law so that will deter future people from coming. And then deal now in the short term with the issue that the children are here. So that's what I'm trying to say.
Well, going to what he was saying, the money that goes into legalizing somebody that comes in is pretty huge for every person, and not going to profit sake some more money they invest. But for example, 9/11, everything changed after 9/11. Everything became strict, and there's legalization came the day before 9/11, not the day before, but and then after, and their legal process is 100% different. So I feel that, well, there's long-term and there's short-term answers, but going towards the humanistic perspective, that's why I was saying, is there anything we can do to stop the problem going on now with the spike, which is causing the migration of the kids? Because, yeah, Cuba has their policies, and you come in a raft, you come in an airplane, and then Argentina and Chile and everybody has their different policies, and you will become, or you get sent back, or you become a citizen, depending on like really small technicalities. But like, I think the government is because the government doesn't keep all the kids. If you have a parent, they most likely send it to them, depending on the situation, and then if it's like a random person, they really look into who they're giving these kids to. And I think that what they're planning on doing, although they come with maybe like a gang culture and maybe what you would say like a bad culture to start, it's kind of like putting bad apples, like 60,000 bad apples in, like, is that going to take a toll on like our crime and our violence and our drug, that they're coming with like these 8-year-olds that have a drug culture or like a bad culture? But I think that it's important to give them the care and education for them to become profitable citizens or like positive citizens to our country, like we do with every other, like we try to do, like we give free education to other citizens, and FAU gives education to illegal citizens. They have to pay 3 times as much, but I mean, it happens.
Let me bring a voice that we haven't heard into the conversation, and I know we're running out of time, so I think you'll be the last.
I want to go back to what he said, like about white closing it. If you see, like, I'll go like what she said. The income that you get from immigration, it's huge, humongous. Like I've been researching that, like how much for each process. For you to just like get, like if you get married or bring someone else like into the system to become like a permanent resident, just for one person only, the price for it is over $5,000 for one person. If you have like 5 or like you said 400,000 times 5, that's like millions of dollars just per like coming in the U.S. economy system. Like if you close that border out, the economic stability that you have here in the U.S. it'll crash. Same thing, like most of the people, like too, like you see big companies, they're all bringing people to work for them from abroad, like do research and do something like that. All those visas they get to come in, they all cost money. And for that, it's also like more money going into the U.S. system.
That's like a really small percentage of federal revenue. It's not like federal. But it's a lot of money.
It's a lot of money.
The federal government will not crash.
Well, I think we're out of time. But I'm very thankful that you came today to discuss this. I definitely encourage you to continue to think about these topics and issues. I think what is happening with the children on the border, there's so many different directions that you can go, both with your own thoughts and with policies and with arguments that you can make. So I encourage you to continue the conversation with your classmates and colleagues. So thank you for coming.
And we're thankful that you listened to the conversation.